So when we define the Trinity, a lot of times I guess some folks will fall into the area of not defining it correctly, and thus they fall into areas of tritheism. You know, they may even define the Trinity the same way that a modalist would define the understanding, I guess, quote unquote, the Trinity in some degree. You know, so what would be your proper definition of how we should define the Trinity?
Yeah, so there's three errors, and to alliterate this, I like to just use the three S's here that I use as sort of umbrella terms. They cover a number of different views, but Sabellianism, what you refer to as modalism, the doctrine that collapses the persons into each other. So the Father just is the Son just is the Spirit. The doctrine of subordinationism, which is found in groups like the early Arians, the Eunomians, and others down to the present day, which teaches that the Son is of a different essence than the Father, a subordinate manner of existence, and so not fully and properly God, and ditto for the Spirit. And then Socinianism, which is really just a more intense version of subordinationism, which teaches that the Son is not only not properly God, as Arianism taught, but he also isn't even the first and greatest creature of God, but merely a human being. And so any definition of God that's going to be true to the Bible is going to have to steer clear of all those errors. And the way the church has done this is basically to say something like, there are three persons in the Godhead, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and these three are one true eternal God, the same in substance, equal in power and glory. And so while these persons are one as to their essence or godhood, they are distinguished according to their personal properties, namely the properties of paternity, filiation, and spiration. That is, the Father begat the Son is begotten of the Father, and the Spirit is breathed or spirated. And so that's the doctrine of the Trinity in a nutshell. And one thing I would say about this, by the way, is if you're thinking fundamentally about God and what we mean by God, one of the things you're saying is that God is the underived and independently existing one, right? He is the one who exists in and of himself and doesn't depend on anything outside of himself, and who caused all other things to exist and depend on him. And so any doctrine of God that's going to be consistent with that fundamental presupposition is going to have to, it can't undermine that fundamental sense of independence. I mean, that's what it means to call God God. And in my mind, it's only the doctrine of the Trinity that can actually preserve what we mean by saying that God is independent. God has all life and glory and communion and blessedness and everything that, we might say of a superlative being. He has all of that in and of himself and doesn't have to look outside of himself to realize these things. There are no hidden potentialities in God. And so it's only in the doctrine of the Trinity that you actually have this sort of thing. In every other version of God, God has to look outside of himself in order to realize his hidden potential for love or communion or communication or fellowship or whatever else it may be. So I know I threw in a little more there, but
Yeah, that's fine.